Well, the next Walt Disney Company earnings call is just about a week away on Wednesday, February 8th at 3:30 p.m. U.S. Central Standard Time. We'll be covering it here on Valiant Renegade Live to give you our reactions as the news comes in. But one of the things that we certainly expect to start happening is for Bob Iger and company to at least subtly start throwing out an enormous blame game on Bob Chapek. Let's talk about it. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks not yet subscribed to this channel, take a moment and turn that subscribe button from red to gray. Also, please hit the notification bell so you can find out when we launch that stream for the Disney earnings call and every other video that we put out. Please hit the like button, hit the share button, and of course, do leave a comment below the video before you head out the door today. Let's get right into a recent article from Deadline magazine. Disney's reorganization looms ahead of the first earnings report since Bob Iger's return. The initial exuberance and relief following Iger's return as Disney CEO has been replaced by anxiety as speculation about a pending corporate restructuring is intensifying, and with it, rumors about the layoffs that are likely to follow. Rumblings of a new organizational chart unveiling are growing louder amid mounting pressure on the company, including from activist investor Nelson Peltz, to stage a rebound with Iger back at the controls. Details on the restructuring moves, which could potentially include some sort of consolidation within the company's marketing operations as well as Disney Television Studios, are likely to emerge soon and could coincide with the company's next quarterly earnings report on February 8th, sources tell Deadline. Now, as you may recall, if you've been following us here on Valiant Renegade for some time, when Chapek took over, he made a lot of changes to the distribution structure of the Walt Disney Company. Namely, instead of having each individual studio head have full autonomy over their projects and how they would be distributed to the public, that is to say, theatrical release, television, streaming, so on and so forth, all of that was consolidated into one department, which Disney called DMED, Disney Media and Entertainment Distribution. And that was headed by Bob Chapek's top lieutenant that he appointed at the time, Mr. Kareem Daniel. Now, as you may also recall, right around that same time, we had a lot of rumblings from inside the studio. They didn't like the restructuring, particularly the studio heads themselves. They did not like losing power to Mr. Daniel, and that was something that they consistently revolted against time and time again. That was part of the reason that we saw the big flack that blew up in the early part of 2022 when the entire Florida House Bill 1557 thing happened, and Pixar came out and discussed with Variety that, well, at every turn, people had been stopping them from putting quote-unquote overtly gay affection into their children's programmings. That was part of the revolt against Kareem Daniel, against Bob Chapek, and the new DMED system. And of course, Bob Iger was one of those that didn't care for it either. Even though he was no longer chairman of the board, even though he was no longer the CEO of the Walt Disney Company anymore at that point as of January 1 of last year, it didn't matter. Iger wanted to show the world that what he was doing before Chapek showed up was the right way and that Chapek was screwing things up. That's the bottom line, and I don't expect the earnings call to sound much different. I expect Bob Chapek to be thrown under the bus time and time again, even if not directly by name, but certainly by a few indirect, subtle digs. Let's continue with the article. Bob Iger didn't waste any time issuing one high-profile pink slip after replacing Bob Chapek last November, not even a full day after his restoration to the corner office. DMED chairman Kareem Daniel left the company. Iger had made no secret of his dislike of DMED, which was created by Chapek as a way of centralizing distribution decisions under Daniel, a Chapek loyalist. The division mainly succeeded in fomenting resentment and mistrust, taking decision-making power away from the company's creative leaders and straining creative relationships. Now again, at the end of the day, business is business, and if Mr. Chapek felt he had found a more efficient way to do things, then just as they had lamented Mr. Iger had not had enough time to answer Mr. Peltz's questions, maybe they should have thought about giving Mr. Chapek a little bit of time to clear the decks, since every project up to that point that Mr. Chapek was dealing with were all greenlit under Mr. Iger. While DMED is going to be dismantled, there are questions about how the unwinding will happen and about the fate of the remaining executives. Atop the list are Deborah O'Connell, president of networks for Disney Media and Entertainment Distribution, and her top lieutenant, the head of business operations, Chuck Saftler. both of whom are highly respected within the company and beyond. Now, the next few paragraphs in the article go on to name pretty much every division head at Disney, their respective studios, where they may fall in line, different TV stations, cable stations, broadcast, linear, streaming, so on and so forth. But the paragraph after that, kind of enjoyable. Watch. This situation is reviving questions raised at the time of Disney's $71.3 billion acquisition of Fox assets as to whether Disney would keep then ABC Studios and 20th Century Fox Television separate. Ultimately, they did remain standalone studios with their own infrastructures, though Fox 21 Studios was folded into 20th TV, which is now run by Carrie Burke. Meanwhile, 20th Television Animation was made a separate division led by Marcy Prito, and ABC Studios was rebranded as ABC Signature with Johnny Davis at the helm. Do you see a problem here? Do you see the pattern? See, Bob Iger, as we've all discussed many times, went on a spending spree over the 15 years that he was CEO of the Walt Disney Company, buying such entities as Marvel Studios, as Pixar, as Lucasfilm. I don't think we need to rehash that mess that it's been since it came to Disney. But also the biggest one, the $70 billion purchase of Fox, or at least the assets that Disney could retain based on antitrust laws. They did have to peel off a few elements of that. They could not take it all because they would have become too big of a juggernaut. But as you may be able to pick up from the article, a lot of these division heads and a lot of these divisions themselves from Fox were never really consolidated. There's still a mess of separate entities everywhere. There's a lot of duplicity in management and oversight that probably doesn't need to be there. In other words, Disney is probably spending a lot more money than they should be to operate these different divisions if they could find more efficient economies of scale. Something I personally believe, based on his actions, based on his word, and quite frankly, the creation of the DMED division led by Kareem Daniel, it seems like Bob Chapek was trying to find those efficiencies, and there were some folks that didn't like that. A successful potential consolidation of 20th TV and ABC Signature will depend on melding their two very different cultures. Can two fried eggs become an omelet? A well-positioned observer asked. Dana Walden, a name who has been posited as a possible Iger replacement in 2 years as Disney CEO, who has risen to the role of chairman of Disney General Entertainment Content, does know plenty about bridging divides as the highest-ranking former Fox exec now in Burbank. Walden just recently consolidated another area of the division she took over last summer, bringing back together publicity and communications years after they had been split. One position was eliminated as a result, with more cuts likely. Deadline has also heard that the movie studio, that would be Fox, is currently riding the success of Avatar: The Way of Water and is not expected to be part of the pending cuts. And now that some of the Chapek-era pricing issues have been addressed and Iger has gone on a few team-building visits to Anaheim and Orlando, the two major parks for Walt Disney in the U.S., the ruptures at the revenue-rich parks, experiences, and products division seem to be starting to heal. Aww. But here's the crux of the article. At the heart of Disney's bottom line issue, we're told, is that sexiest of business lines, accounting. Under the Byzantine nature of the company's current system, that is the system, of course, that was put in place by Mr. Chapek, and it is apparently Byzantine. The production of a company's particular program or series sends a program to DMED, and then, via an intercompany transaction, DMED reimburses the production for the cost of said program or series. Most importantly, to Wall Street, all losses sit on DMED's books, which is not a good look. Quote, "How we fix that will determine in no small way how Wall Street reacts," said a Tinseltown dealmaker of Disney's dilemma. A primary focus of the cost-cutting effort is stimulating the stock price, whose decline has prompted Nelson Peltz to initiate a proxy battle. Shares at the end of 2022 bottomed out at a multi-year low after Chapek presided over a disastrous, quote-unquote, disastrous quarterly earnings report. As SEC filings after his exit have made clear, he had lost the confidence of the board earlier in the year, further preventing a smooth reemergence from the COVID cave. Now, remember, Bob Chapek apparently lost the confidence of the very same board earlier that year, where earlier that year, that very same board renewed him months early for another couple of years. Figure that one out. Deadline. I don't know. But the bottom line here is the blame game, and expect quite a bit of it. Expect quite a bit of it from Bob Iger to Bob Chapek on that earnings call on February 8th, while Iger is basically trying to defend himself against this activist investor, Nelson Peltz from Trian, which we've covered in a previous video. I'll leave a link to it in this one. You need to go back and watch that for sure to get yourself ready for the earnings call coming up on February 8th. But, here's the big problem. All of these projects, as I briefly mentioned earlier, that Chapek had to deal with, running through DMED, where, according to this article, DMED was collecting all of the losses on its books, something that I had posited several months ago. And by the way, if you're wondering what absorbed losses at DMED look like, well, that is basically what accounts for the massive losses attributed to Disney+. Those projects were all greenlit under Bob Iger before he left. Things like Turning Red from Pixar, or Lightyear, or even Strange World, movies that were either non-existent at the box office or practically non-existent at the box office and cost Disney hundreds of millions of dollars each just to produce. Then we've got what's going on Disney+, where Disney on each show is spending much more money than its peer groups on average to put out their headline content for Disney+. And if you saw some of the recent numbers from Nielsen with which programs on which streaming services were the biggest ones in 2022, you'll find that the Walt Disney name barely appears on those lists at all, save for some of their actual movie titles, but none of their really original series. Let me show you real quick. Who dominated the Nielsen streaming charts in 2020? Well, let's scroll down and see. The top 15 original streaming shows. Disney does not have a single one on it. Matter of fact, The Boys from Amazon Prime and The Rings of Power from Amazon Prime managed to round out the top 15 at positions 11 and 15 respectively, and everything else on that list is completely dominated by Netflix, including Inventing Anna, which with only 9 episodes racked up 12.9 billion cumulative watch minutes in the US and Canada. Let's look at 2022's overall programs. Well, Disney finally does show up with their mega hit Encanto, which again did not do terribly well at the theaters, but found its groove once it hit Disney+. That showed up at the number 5 position with 27.4 billion watch minutes. And look at Bluey with 114 episodes on Disney Plus with 21.1 billion. But I'll remind everybody that of those two, only Encanto is an original Disney property. Bluey was something that Disney acquired the rights to stream. But if you look at the rest of that list as compared to the 2 entries by Disney, one of the things you have to understand about children's programming, as WDW Pro correctly pointed out in a video of his just the other day, I'll leave a link to that one as well, he covers this streaming chart in more detail than I do with Disney's successes and failures. But needless to say, his posit about children rewatching content over and over again is 100% correct, meaning that the watch minutes, the watch time that accumulate for something like Encanto or something like Bluey accumulate in a very different fashion than most other general programming content, say like Cobra Kai. So for example, if you watched all 10 episodes of the new season of Cobra Kai, you probably watched it once. Maybe you watched it twice. But if you're a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old and you're watching Encanto or Bluey, you are reconsuming that same product most likely several times over, 3, 4, 5, 10 times before you put it down. That's just how kids react. Think about the days when we grow up and we had our favorite kids' movies, our favorite Disney movies, maybe from back in the 90s, and we would wear those VHS cassette tapes out, putting them in every day after day after day after day. So all the losses and all the problems that Disney had, at least from its studio side, could largely be blamed on who greenlit the projects. And in that case, at this point, for everything we've seen in the last couple of years, those are projects that were greenlit years before by Mr. Iger and his structure at Disney. You can't really blame Mr. Chapek and Mr. Daniel for them not performing well, because frankly, when people got a taste of things like Lightyear or Strange World or Turning Red, they just didn't perform that well. Yes, they showed up on Disney Plus, and yes, they made a little bit of noise there, but how many people actually watch them? How memorable will those movies be in just a few years, unlike some of the Disney movies of the past? And this is a brand problem that Disney has created for itself over the last several years, diving into the more socio-political era that really a lot of parents just don't want their kids to have to sit through. Stay tuned. We'll be covering the earnings call February 8th. That's Wednesday afternoon, 3:30 p.m. U.S. Central Standard Time, right here on Valiant Renegade. Make sure you join us. That one is going to be fun. In fact, there's some speculation that this might be the most fun earnings call. And, of course, the annual stockholder meeting about a month later in March, since Michael Eisner headed out the door about 20 years ago now. Till next time, take care.